2157. A voiceover narrates, Earth has forgotten about wars and famine. Nature has revived, medicine has conquered deadly diseases. Humanity is exploring unknown planets, entrusting the search for extraterrestrial life in deep space to students full of strength, courage, and a belief in goodness. A young man named Max embarks on another flight. Suddenly, his spacecraft is damaged by an asteroid and makes an emergency landing on an unknown planet. Max steps outside, and immediately his shuttle explodes, leaving him without communication. But he doesn't despair, and first of all, decides to explore. By all parameters, the planet resembles Earth, and the astronaut hopes to find help and maybe a communication system here. But an indigenous inhabitant captures him in the forest. To understand the language of this planet, Max inserts a translator capsule into his ear. The indigenous person, named Zeph, turns Max over to the authorities. They put a helmet on Max that can project a person's thoughts and memories onto a screen and begin the interrogation. At the same time, in a nearby room, Corporal Gaius is assigned to transport Max to the capital as a subconvoy. Here, Max senses a strange signal, and everyone around starts chanting the anthem of the guard. Later, they pass by a strange tower, which, according to Gaius, serves to protect against enemies. Suddenly, its base explodes, and the structure collapses onto the road. Gaius is trapped inside the car, but Max pulls the corporal out. It turns out that this act was carried out by the rebels, the main enemies of the supreme authority of the state. The two men reach the capital on foot. Meanwhile, the head of the Department of Special Research, known as the Wanderer, summons his subordinate named Fank and instructs him to deliver Max to the department. Fank takes Max away, while the Republic's prosecutor reports that the Wanderer has taken in a strange savage and instructs gathering all available information about it. Then it's time to activate the towers, and everyone prepares in their own way. The prosecutor enters the bathroom and clamps a special stick between his teeth. Meanwhile, Fank has a seizure, and while soldiers assist him, Max manages to escape from the vehicle. The shocked young man walks through the city, marveling at the unfamiliar and incomprehensible life. Meanwhile, the unknown fathers gather for a meeting, as they call the rulers of this planet. After a long walk, Max enters a local cafe where he stands up for a waitress who was insulted by one of the patrons. The grateful girl introduces herself as Rada. It turns out that she is the sister of Corporal Gaius. While escorting her home, Max gets into a brawl with a street gang and defeats them. Impressed, Rada takes him to her place. Later, Gaius returns home. Max starts asking questions about the workings of their world and quickly realizes that Rada and Gaius's minds are poisoned by propaganda and false information. Rada is convinced that their planet is hollow and there is no such thing as the sky or space. Meanwhile, Gaius educates his new friend about the political structure of their state, known as Saraksh. The Unknown Fathers are the saviors of the homeland who have stopped wars with the help of defense towers that protect the country from attacks. Nobody knows the Unknown Fathers' true identities because they are not rulers, but public servants. At Max's request, Corporal recommends him for the guard. Max demonstrates a high level of training, which surprises Gaius. The two men often argue about politics, and one day Gaius admits that neighboring states hate Saraksh because they were once a single state united by a common history. Gradually, romantic feelings develop between Max and Rada. They go for walks often, and Max tells her about his home planet, Earth, and regrets that his parents believe he is dead. Soon, Max is tasked with catching rebels, whom they identify by their regular seizures reminiscent of epileptic fits. One of the rebels attacks the captain, and Max saves his life, after which the captain suddenly regrets catching them, as they are also human beings. Max reveals that he considered them something like savages. Later, Max attends interrogations and sees that the rebels are not terrorists, as the Unknown Fathers label them, but ordinary people with their ideals and beliefs. Max cannot come to terms with the cruelty of the interrogations and simply cannot believe that someone is paying the rebels to hate the government. Meanwhile, Fank reports to the Wanderer that he has found the savage, while Gaius and Max are summoned to the captain of the guard, who orders Max to execute the arrested rebels. Max leads the condemned to the execution site in the forest, but soon he returns to the commanding officer, drops his gear and weapons, as he has released the arrested rebels, and walks away. Max begins to speak about the real and just order of the world that exists on Earth. In response, the captain shoots Max, and Gaius is ordered to write a report about the transfer. Meanwhile, the unknown fathers are discussing an attack on neighboring states. The prosecutor advocates for starting a war, and the chief father orders them to come up with a pretext, such as an attack on a tower. During this time, Max's body is recovered by the rebels. Among them is a doctor who is astonished because, according to all the rules, Max should have died. He reveals that the unknown fathers are a group of conspirators who have seized power and eliminated dissenters, thus diverting the population's attention from poverty and corruption. The towers are transmitters of special radiation that hypnotizes the impoverished people, although most of them do not notice it. The minority, which includes the rebels, experiences excruciating pain. The transmitters are activated twice a day across the country, causing people to go insane and die. Max is recognized as one of their own and taken for an operation to sabotage the tower, organized by the prosecutor through a traitor. Amid gunfire, Max makes his way to the transmitter and detonates it. However, the rebel squad perishes. Max seeks refuge in Rada's apartment, where he reveals everything he has learned about the towers. Gaius does not believe this and suggests that Max should return to his home and take Rada with him. But at that moment, the guards storm the apartment and arrest the men. Max is incarcerated in a prison, where he is recognized by the indigenous Zeph, who is also a rebel. Max tells Zeph about the tower's destruction and the loss of the rebel squad. Meanwhile, the Wanderer asks the prosecutor to hand over Max to him. The prosecutor, however, requests in return to halt the development of more precise transmitters, as he fears that his secret will be revealed since his reaction to the radiation is similar to that of the rebels, meaning he is also a dissenter. Later, Max and other death row inmates are sent to clear the southern borders of the remaining war robots. During this time, the prosecutor learns that Max is immune to the emitters. He decides to break the agreement with the Wanderer and orders Max to be brought to him. The next day, Max attempts to convey to the rebels the idea that they should not destroy the towers one by one but strike at the center, where the signal originates. Zeph becomes furious and explains that the towers are not for identifying dissenters. They are active continuously, not just twice a day. The radiation from the towers robs people of their ability to think critically. However, it makes them believe everything that newspapers, radio, teachers, and preachers say. People can be made to believe anything. Only the rebels understand this, as the radiation does not hypnotize them, but only inflicts agonizing pain. Zeph continues, there are mutants in the south who are also unaffected by the radiation. However, they have no dealings with humans. Just then, they hear the roar of an engine, and Zeph identifies it as a self-propelled tank, trying to kill them. Max sprints to the tank, climbs inside, and disables the automatic control system. He then informs his friends that he is heading south to find allies and destroy the towers. At the border, the military attempts to stop the tank, and among them, Max recognizes Gaius. Taking him captive, Max breaks through the barricades. On the way, Max tells Gaius about the true situation on this planet, and Gaius becomes convinced of his accuracy when, at the designated time, he is outside the tower's range and does not feel the radiation. Gaius gets angry upon realizing that he has been a puppet of the government all this time, but Max tries to calm him down and reminds him that there are 40 million people like him, and it is for them that he initiated this rebellion. During a stop, residents of the steppes, referred to as mutants, appear near the tank. They behave peacefully and offer food to the travelers. The guys proceed to the ruler of these lands, noting the poverty and destitution of the population. They are told that it is dangerous to live here after the last war, but these people are outcasts with nowhere else to go. Max suggests to their leader, the Duke, to start a rebellion against the unknown fathers, but the mutants are physically and morally too weak to help in the uprising. The mutants propose that the guys seek help from the island empire. However, to do that, they must pass through contaminated lands. So the Duke gifts them an old bomber and the guys take to the sky. During the flight, the bomber is exposed to the radiation from the towers, and Gaius becomes fanatically devoted to Max, obstructing him from piloting. Max struggles to maintain control, and the bomber collides with a tower. Gaius suddenly snaps out of his fanatic state with no recollection of what he had just done. However, their aircraft is shot down by the automated anti-aircraft defense system left over from the previous war. The downed bomber crashes into the sea, but Max and Gaius manage to escape and reach the shore. On the shore, they discover an abandoned submarine, and Max decides to go inside. At the same time, in the city, the prosecutor orders Rada to be brought to him, and his men snatch her off the street. He claims to be Max's friend and shows Rada a recording of his escape. However, she doesn't believe him and refuses to assist the prosecutor in his search for her beloved. Rada is thrown into prison. Meanwhile, Gaius, impatiently waiting for his friend, swims to the submarine where they discover evidence of horrifying experiments conducted on prisoners. The guys reach the control room and view video recordings of mass executions of Gaius's fellow countrymen by the representatives of the island empire whom they were seeking help from. Gaius is horrified by the fact that these monsters could invade his country. It becomes evident that forming an alliance with the empire is not an option. The guys return to the shore, where they are met by a coastal patrol. It turns out that a war has broken out with a neighboring state, and like most of the prisoners, they will be sent to the front. Meanwhile, the Wanderer, desiring to lure Max into his department, engineers Rada's escape. He laments how the war has disrupted all his plans and assigns Fank the task of finding and bringing Max back, confessing that he is afraid of him. At the same time, Max and Gaius are dispatched to the front, where they reunite with Zeph. Their commander turns out to be the captain of the guard, who refuses to hand over the Earthling to the arriving Fank. The guys are sent into battle on old tanks when Fank finally locates Max. However, Max refuses to leave his friends and stuns the officer, tossing him into their tank. The battle commences, but Max directs his vehicle to the other side of the battlefield. Gaius blindly obeys him, influenced by the radiation, and pulls their unconscious friends out, which the captain witnesses. Gaius offers his body as a shield when the captain prepares to execute Max for desertion, but the wounded Max gathers his last strength and kills the commander. Max mourns his friend, but upon hearing Rada's name from the now conscious Fank, agrees to cooperate with the Wanderer. After the battle ends, Max buries Gaius while listening to Fank's proposals. He will have an apartment on the Institute's premises, his car, and freedom of movement. But he will only see Rada once he proves his loyalty to the state. Meanwhile, the prosecutor heads to the Wanderer's department, where he deceitfully meets with Max. He proposes that Max overthrow the Unknown Fathers by providing the coordinates of the center that controls the tower system. Upon infiltrating the center, Max must activate special radiation, causing waves of depression, which will subdue all the people in the country, including the military. Then, Max must eliminate the Unknown Fathers. Afterward, he will become the ruler of the state and free Rada, who's in the Wanderer's hands. The prosecutor will serve as his advisor. Max takes Zeph with him and embarks on the mission. He arrives at the center and issues orders to his associates, instructing them to detonate the bomb in the trunk if he does not return. He easily gains access to the interior, but is halted by guards just before reaching the elevator. Max incapacitates them, but the men regain consciousness and pursue him. Max reaches the control center and activates the depression mode throughout the country. The Wanderer watches as people fall to the ground and rushes toward the control center. Meanwhile, Max returns to retrieve the bomb, places it inside the building, and triggers it. Then, he leaves the site of the impending explosion. The Wanderer initiates a pursuit of Max and, catching up with him, engages in a confrontation. At that moment, a powerful explosion resounds, destroying the main transmitter. People on the streets begin to regain their senses and sobriety as Max rushes to find Rada and locates her in a cryo chamber. He carries the girl outside, but the Wanderer blocks his path. It is then revealed that he is, in fact, an employee of Galactic Security from Earth who arrived on the planet 20 years ago to assist it. Now, chaos erupts on the streets, leading to a power struggle in which many people will perish. In his rage, the Wanderer beats up a foolish student who destroyed the fruits of his labor. Forgetting about economics and inflation, the state faces famine and invasion from neighboring countries. Max starts to resist and, in turn, accuses the Wanderer of allowing the construction of the towers and the enslavement of the local population. However, the Wanderer reminds him of the laws of history, where all rational beings go through the experience of wars and enslavement. This planet is no exception. It is at this point that Max declares that he is now home. As long as he is alive, he will fight against inflation, hunger, and wars, and will not allow the establishment of yet another society based on slavery. Rada comes to Max, and as they stand together, the Wanderer smiles. People often fantasize about immortality, But what if a person could live for a few hundred years or thousands? What would an immortal look like? What would they do? How would they relate to family and religion? In 2007, director Richard Shankman attempted to explore these questions in the science fiction film The Man from Earth, and this fiction makes us contemplate the real. That's the case with Ja. There's a grave disorder. Is he serious? He is. The film begins with scenes of a 35-year-old man loading his belongings into the open bed of a pickup truck. Two cars approach his house. People step out of them. Dan, Sandy, Harry, and Edith. They are colleagues and friends of the main character, Professor John Oldman. They are puzzled. Why is he planning to leave and without saying goodbye? Dan jokes that he must be in a hurry to take over a chair at Stanford, and Harry shows a basket of food, regretting that they don't have enough time. Otherwise, they would have arranged something grand. Edith notices a painting near the car. She's in awe. It looks very much like a Van Gogh, but she's never seen it before. John says it's a gift from a friend. Edith is surprised. It looks like an authentic one. John invites his friends into the house. They ask him to tell the truth. Why is he leaving his home and 10 years of teaching? John responds that he can't stay in one place for long, but his friends don't believe it. It can be that he moves so frequently. He's only 35 and he hasn't aged a bit in the last 10 years. Any woman on the faculty would give anything to know the secret. At that moment, Professor of Archaeology Art Jenkins arrives with his student, Linda. He gives John a book about prehistoric caves as a memento and also wonders where John is heading. Again, John says that he just enjoys moving around and brings out an expensive bottle of whiskey. People become more cheerful and forget about the uncomfortable questions. They form a circle and wish him a long life and good luck. On the shelf, Dan finds a strange bone artifact. It's a flint knife, a silicon tool for carving wood and bone. The Cro-Magnons used it in the Paleolithic era. While the group examines the artifact, John suddenly asks, what do they think an Upper Paleolithic human would look like if they could have lived to the present time? Dan replies that, as Art's book says, he could be just like any of them, and if he had lived for centuries, he would have changed with each passing century, meaning that the Upper Paleolithic people had the same intelligence as modern humans, they just knew less. Linda is curious, according to the biologist, what would sustain his life. Biologist Harry says that it would require complete cell regeneration. It is believed that the human body is designed for a lifespan of around 190 years. Edith laments, as many would love to know the secret of eternal life. Harry responds that what is magic for one time is science for another. After all, Columbus and Copernicus were once considered mad. And then John reveals that he could have traveled with Columbus, but he isn't the adventurous type. Moreover, he was already convinced that Earth was round. However, back then he still believed that there was an edge somewhere that one could fall off. The friends give uncertain smiles, thinking it's a joke, right? But John denies it. Every 10 years or so, people start to notice that he doesn't age and he has to leave. The friends are puzzled. Is he saying he's a Cro-Magnon? John explains that at least for the last 4,000 years, since the time of Mesopotamia, he's been sure of it. In his first life, he lived to about 35 years old and became the leader of his tribe because they believed he was a sorcerer. He didn't even have to fight for it. But then fear arose and they banished him. People believed he was stealing their life force to remain young. He was pursued because he wouldn't die. That's how the habit of joining new tribes he encountered along the way emerged. At first, John thought something was wrong with him. Maybe he was evil and that's why he couldn't die. Then he thought he might be cursed, or on the contrary, blessed. Later, he believed there was some purpose to his existence, and now he thinks he simply came into being. His friends are intrigued. John's story is full of interest. Edith is curious again about the fate of the Van Gogh painting. And John tells them that Van Gogh gave him the painting when John was Jacques Born, a pig farmer. Van Gogh used to visit him, paint, and talk about how nature finds its reflection in art. Art asks, "Did you always leave?" John shrugs. Sometimes he created a new identity for the next 10 years. Sometimes he even posed as his own son. But a few times he got caught. He even spent a year in a Belgian prison in 1862 for forging state documents. His friends start to get annoyed. John seems to have an answer to everything except one. Why does he do it? And he answers, he just wanted them to say goodbye to him specifically. After this, those around him conclude that John has serious issues. He remembers about moving. He still needs to take the boxes. While the man is carrying his belongings, Harry tries to find hidden microphones or cameras. People just can't believe that what is happening is real. At the car, Sandy confesses her love to John. He says that she's not indifferent to him either. But now she understands what she's getting into, right? Because one day he'll be forced to leave. He cannot give her eternity. But she objects. What is eternity, and who has it? Her parents divorced even before she was born. Besides, there's death, illness, insurmountable circumstances. Nobody knows how much time they have, whether it's a lot or little. She loves him and will accept everything he can give her. John and Sandy return to the house. Their friends say that they still have more questions. For example, does he remember any of his native languages? The man replies that he remembers a little. Besides, they haven't changed much. And did he engage in cave painting? Yes, he knew a man named Daru who was excellent at his work. He painted animals that hunters hoped to kill and eat. Once, after an unsuccessful hunt, the leader knocked out all his teeth for failing with his magic. After that, someone had to chew his food for him. Eventually, he developed jawbone inflammation and they abandoned him. Then John headed east. It was at the beginning of the Bronze Age. He walked along trade routes and learned the languages of the places he visited. Everywhere there were myths about the creation of the world and new gods. He was a Sumerian for 2,000 years, then a Babylonian during Hammurabi's reign. For some time he sailed as a Phoenician. It seems he spent his whole life on the road and learned a few new tricks. He even staged his own death a couple of times. He made it to India and met Buddha, the most remarkable person he had ever encountered. Buddha taught John many things he had never pondered before. In the midst of the debate, Dr. Will Gruber arrives. The doctor says that there's absolutely no way for John to prove the truth of his story, and no way they could verify it. He's either their friend, or a caveman, or a liar, or a lunatic. The doctor is curious. In this extensive life being discussed, did he ever get sick? John answers affirmatively. Like everyone else, he had serious illnesses, perhaps pneumonia or other lung infections. He suffered from typhoid, yellow fever, and smallpox. He survived the bubonic plague, and it's even more horrifying than history tells. But he doesn't have any scars. Among the friends, a debate flares up, whether to believe John's stories or not. They contradict all their notions about nature. Dan is puzzled. A person with John's intellect would have studied a lot of things. John confesses he has 10 scientific degrees, including all those his friends have. He earned his biology doctorate at Oxford in 1840, but his achievements are just an excess of time, not brilliance. Suddenly, Dr. Will pulls out a gun. He asks John if he would survive if he is shot, but John never claimed he was immortal, just very old. The doctor is curious. What does John think about death? Is he afraid of it? John explains that ancient people thought about death, but they had a practical understanding. They stopped moving, fell, and never got up. Infections were incomprehensible. Aging was the biggest mystery. So at first, John thought that everyone around him was wrong. After all, they aged and died. And again, the friends ask, what is it like for a person when everyone they knew has died? The doctor asks John about his parents, but he says he only remembers glimpses. The doctor remarks that it's not surprising. He too remembers his father very vaguely. Will starts reasoning about what's fair and what's not. They will all die and he will keep on living. If that's true, it's not surprising that they might feel envy and even hatred. He accuses John. The others are outraged and try to stop the doctor, but he says that John is living an unjust life. Perhaps it's time for him to die. The doctor leaves, and then Harry informs everyone that Will's wife died yesterday, which is why he's so aggressive. John runs after his friend to apologize. Meanwhile, the others discuss John. The theory of illness comes up. John returns. The next question from his friends is whether there are others like him. The man admits that in the 17th century he met someone like him, and that person told him everything, confirming that he was just like John, but from a different time and place. They talked for 2 days and then parted ways. Edith asks if he believes in God. The friends become engaged as religious questions are close to everyone. Did he meet anyone from the Bible? Was he a part of religious history? Numerous theories are suggested. Edith is outraged, considering it blasphemy. John recounts that he once encountered Buddha and he liked what he heard. He had been contemplating the teachings for 500 years. Then he became Etruscan and infiltrated the Roman Empire. He didn't like how it turned into a massive killing machine. He went to the Middle East, thinking of passing on Buddha's teachings in a renewed form. He tried, but he was one dissident against Rome. Rome won, and the rest is well known. So John was Jesus? Yes, during the crucifixion he blocked the pain. He learned this technique in Tibet. He also slowed down bodily processes so much that they couldn't be detected. Everyone thought he died. They took him down from the cross and laid him in a cave. When he regained consciousness, he wanted to leave unnoticed, but a bunch of fanatics wouldn't let him do that. So he resurrected and headed to Central Europe. He can't prove it, he has no scars, and besides, they tied him down. But blood and nails look more convincing on icons. Edith is outraged. John deeply hurt her feelings. The friends start discussing religious questions. John says that he preached that Christ's teachings were about tolerance, brotherhood, and love. Life is here on earth, here and now. But then the talking serpent persuaded a woman to eat the apple, and everything went awry. Heaven and hell became tools for priests to rule with reward and punishment, trying to save souls that people never lost. John observes rituals, ceremonies, processions, genuflections, the moans of singers and choirs, and he thinks this is not what he meant. At this time, Dr. Will returns. The debates about religion, Christianity, and piety continue. The friends rack their brains. Was it the fabrication, a mental disorder, drugs? But they can't find a solution. John completely baffled the 4 scientists. He continues to explain that religion is not what is happening now. The church grew out of fairy tales. Even the name Jesus grew out of John. He never claimed to be the Son of God. He wanted to share knowledge. He did not walk on water or resurrect the dead. The friends gather to leave, although they are excited by his story. Edith pleads again to say that he's not Jesus, and she starts crying. The lights come on. Will demands that he admit that it was all a joke. And then John confesses that it was just a story. Their outrage knows no bounds. But John says that they themselves pushed him to this thought. They said he doesn't age. Edith saw Van Gogh, then found the chisel. They themselves bought into his game, and he couldn't resist seeing how they would react to his words. After all, he had such a splendid audience. An anthropologist, an archaeologist, an expert in Christianity, a psychologist, and a biologist. Linda, standing in the doorway, asks if the name Oldman is a play on words, old man. The infuriated people leave except for Will. He stays in the room and John sees his friends off. Sandy asks, what other telltale names did he come up with for himself? And John starts listing. John Political, John Hermit, and about 60 years ago when he was teaching at Harvard, he was John Thomas Party. Will's voice is heard. Wait, 60 years ago? John Party? John turns to him and says that his mother's name was Nola. Will initially denies every word, but in tears he confirms Nola was his mum. But he can't believe it, and he asks for the name of their dog. John names it Woofy, and he asks if she got married again. Will says he feels cold, and John pities the old man. He was always cold. Will tries to touch his face. His father had a beard, and John confirms that he always checked if it was real. Will collapses. An ambulance and police car arrive at the house. They carry Will's body on a stretcher, covering it with a sheet over his head. Everyone leaves. Sandy asks if he has seen his adult child die before. John shakes his head. He gets into the car and drives away from the house. Sandy looks at him. The car stops at the bend. Smiling, she walks towards it. The Man from Earth is a very ambiguous movie. However, it makes you wonder. It raises very complex questions about morality, ethics, and religion. It is fascinating to follow the flight of human thought and to think, what if? Turid Sayer, together with her teenage sons, Magne and Lauritz, return to the Norwegian city of Edda after many years of absence. At the entrance to the city, their car gets stuck behind an old man in an electric wheelchair who is trying to turn right. Magne gets out of the car to help, and the old man's wife approaches him. Looking into the guy's eyes, she smiles with satisfaction. He's a good boy, and then she touches his forehead. Magne's iris changes color for a moment, and then the guy feels something unusual in the perception of the world. He returns to the car and, trying to close the window, breaks off the window lifter handle. Stunned, Magne turns the thing in his hands and suddenly says that it's going to rain. Mother and brother laugh. There is not a cloud in the sky, and immediately the car is showered with a heavy rain. They continue on their way and get to their grandmother's old house. Lauritz is not happy that there is a shabby-looking trailer near the house, and Magne picks up an advertisement that calls for making the air of the city cleaner. The next morning, the guys go to school. Oddly enough, the brothers are assigned to the same class. The thing is, Magne is dyslexic, which is expressed by difficulties with word recognition and insufficient abilities in reading and writing. Magne's attention is immediately drawn to a pretty blonde, Gry, but Lauritz is ahead of him, and Magne has to sit in the back of the class next to Isolde, who is not popular at school. A lesson on the Scandinavian gods begins, and Magne learns that Edda is the last Norwegian city to convert to Christianity. It was here that Ragnarok took place, during which the gods died and the fate of the giants remained unknown. During lunch, Magne sits at Isolde's desk again and learns that she's on the side of the Greens and is fighting against the pollution of the world. She also introduces the guy to Fjord Utul as son of the owner of the Utul Industries factories, Fjord's sister Saxa, and their mother, the director of the school by the name of Ran. And then she talks about her blog on YouTube. At the end of the classes, the two leave school together, and then Isolde notices that one of the wheels in her bicycle is bent. Much to the girl's astonishment, Magne easily fixes the brake and returns the wheel to its original condition, which surprises him as well. In addition, he notices that his eyesight has begun to improve. The next day, he, Isolde, and Gry get a general assignment in sociology and begin to study democracy. Magne suggests studying the topic by using their town as an example. At this moment, he sees his mother, who has come to talk to the director. The women discuss boys' progress at school and recall the tragedy that happened many years ago when the boy's father died under mysterious circumstances. Later, the mother notices that Magne is not wearing any glasses and does not understand how this can be. But she's distracted by Vidar Utul's car. It turns out that she and Vidar have known each other for a long time. After returning home, Vidar tells his wife Ran about the meeting with the woman, while their children Fjord and Saxa discuss their appearance and whether it matches their age. Vidar gives them a task to follow Magne, who is currently engaged in repairs and notices a rune carved on his father's tools. Later, the guy visits Isolde's page and looks through her materials about the strange death of the fish in the fjord. The next day, the girl invites him to her place and reminds him that he no longer needs glasses. While choosing water in the store, she explains to Magne that he can drink tap water in Edda, and the store clerk suddenly warns the guy about the danger of the vernal equinox. In Isolde's house, the guy finds out that the history teacher, Erich, is the girl's father. At dinner, she invites him to go with her to the mountain as she monitors the speed at which the glacier is melting. They can go down by paragliding. The girl asks her father questions about her mother's death, but he keeps silent. Magne shares his memories of his father, and sweeping the girl's diary off the table, finds out that she has been hopelessly in love with Saxa for a long time. The next day, he tells his classmates about the upcoming hike in the mountains, while Fior invites everyone to a party at his house. Returning home, Magne finds his mother repairing the fence, and his attention is drawn to his father's sledgehammer marked with the rune. The next day, Magne and Isolde go to the mountains. Soon they reach a blocked bridge, but Magne resolutely steps over the warning sign. Suddenly, the boy gets a text that his mother is unwell. He hurries to the city and Isolde goes on alone. Meanwhile, Vidar's car is driving along the mountain road. Stopping on the side of the road, Vidar goes outside, undresses, and starts hunting deer grazing on the mountain. With one blow, he kills the animal and rips out its heart. Meanwhile, Isolde reaches the glacier and sees her marks. She takes water samples and then notices the thawed entrance to the cave and photographs it. Once inside, she finds a door blocking the entrance to the depth of the cave. Standing over the fjord, Vidar eats the raw heart of the deer and emits a heart-rending cry, which frightens Isolde. Upon reaching home, Magne discovers that his mother is absolutely fine and, angry at his brother's stupid joke, goes outside. He sees Isolde paragliding down the mountain. Suddenly, the paraglider starts drifting towards electric wires. The guy hurries to the crash site and finds the girl's lifeless body. Vidar also arrives and tries to help her and then calls for an ambulance, but nothing can be done anymore. Returning home, Magne throws away his glasses and sees the sledgehammer. The distraught guy throws the hammer and it disappears into the clouds, which are instantly covered with lightning. After everything that happened, Magne is taking the death of her friend hard and decides never to wear glasses again. The classmates ask a lot of questions about the girl's death, but he can't say anything definite. He enters the classroom and sits down at the desk whose second half is covered with flowers and burning candles. Ren makes an announcement that there will be no history class today, but suddenly Isolde's father enters the classroom. He cannot stay at home alone. The man asks the school not to cancel the vernal equinox holiday because Isolde would be against such a decision. Later, the police announced that the girl's death was caused by a thunderstorm strike to the dome of the paraglider. But Magne objects. Everything happened before his eyes, and there was no thunderstorm at that time. Nevertheless, the case is being closed. On the same day, Vidar asks Turid to get the insurance money for his car, which was smashed by some madman. And he sends the woman photos in which Turid recognizes the sledgehammer. She hurries home to ask Magne questions, but he himself is shocked by such an accusation. The guy calculates how far he threw the hammer, 1,537 meters. But this is impossible. Magne buys a new sledgehammer and throws it in a deserted place late at night. And then he calculates the distance, 541 meters, which is several times higher than the world's record for hammer throwing. Meanwhile, Vidar examines the sledgehammer while Ran speaks about the experiences of the school children who sincerely mourn the dead girl. And then the husband suddenly admits that he killed Isolde because she found the entrance to the cave. The woman gets angry. They agreed not to touch the children, but since it happened, they need to find Isolde's lost phone. At school, Gry and Magne continue to work on the project together and listen to a warning not to blame the destruction of the planet only on the rich. Later at home, sorting out his mother's things, Lauritz finds an old blouse. Magne invites Gry to work at his house, which leads to a heartfelt conversation about Magne's past. Meanwhile, Turid notices Erich in the store looking lost. She expresses sympathy and the man is grateful to her for it. Lauritz finds Magne watching the weather forecast. Magne insists that there was no thunderstorm the day Isolde died, and then he admits that it was he who threw the sledgehammer into Vidar's car, but his brother doesn't believe it. The celebration of the vernal equinox begins at school. The classmates show Saxa a photo of an improvised altar at the site of Isolde's death, while Vidar inspects this area in search of the girl's phone. He notices that Magne is visiting the place too. At school, everyone is shocked by the sight of Lauritz, who came to the evening in his mother's blouse and with makeup. The headmistress opens the evening and offers a moment of silence for Isolde. Saxa sings a song about her native land, which is interrupted by the appearance of Magne. Later, Lauritz advises his brother to forget about Gry because Fior is already hitting on her. Later, Lauritz starts hitting on Yakutu. Then the headmistress takes the two boys away. Magne sits down with Gry, but Fior invites the girl to a dance, and the guy has nothing to do but sit and watch. Watching them, he crushes the bottle in his hand and it shatters into small pieces. He goes to the men's room where he meets Oscar, whose mother is a police officer, and he blurts out that the girl died from hitting a rock. At this time, hot dancing begins in the hall, and Magne sees the headmistress surrounded by boys. Fior puts on his music and he and Saxa begin a strange sensual dance to which Lauritz joins. The three of them squirm on the dance floor much to the delight and astonishment of the crowd. Magne goes to Isolde's father's house and informs him about the change in the cause of his daughter's death. He's sure that the police are lying, but the inconsolable father asks to not disturb the peace of his dead daughter. Out of anger, Magne easily moves the multi-ton car in front of the house, which terrifies Erich. At this time, Fior, Lauritz and Oscar are going to the altar, and younger Utul, ridiculing people's stupid beliefs, urinates on the burning candles. Oscar manages to record this and upload everything to the internet. Fior orders the video to be deleted, but it has already gone online. Magne is reviewing numerous notes about violations of environmental regulations by Utul Industries, which Erich shows him, and he throws away the girl's diary because she has the right to personal secrets. And at Utul's house, the owner is feeding his dog when Ren shows him a scandalous photo from the altar. The husband promises to deal with this issue. Sex is trying to find out at least something new about Magne from Gry, who stayed overnight at their house, but she does not know anything. She goes to the bathroom and witnesses Vidar beating his son. The man is furious, people worship them too and sacrifice to them. Therefore his son insulted him with his act too. Frightened, Gry hurries to take refuge in Sax's room. The next day, Isolde's funeral takes place and everyone goes to church, but returning home, the Sayer family finds their home trashed. The brothers go to the homeless neighbor, accusing him of stealing from their house. He admits that he has been in the apartment, but only after another man who arrived there in a big black car accompanied by a dog. The brothers realize that it is Vidar but do not understand why he needed it. Later, Magne goes to see a therapist. He feels that everything has changed around him but does not find an explanation for this. He talks about the robbery and accuses the police of inaction, and the therapist tells Ren about the session. Back home, Magne tells his mother about the conversation with the neighbor and blames Vidar, but Turit says that it's absurd and does not want to hear anything about it, especially since Erich has arrived. He hands Isolde's laptop to Magne because his computer is already failing. The guy searches the computer and finds data on changes in natural conditions in the vicinity of Edda. The same evening, Ren tells her husband about the therapy session. She is furious. Not only did Vidar break into Magne's house, but the guy's neighbor saw him. And now everyone can find out about this inexplicable case. The next day, Gry confesses to Fjord that she saw the beating, and it shocked her. But he changes the topic of the conversation. The girl agrees to ride with him, but Lauritz and Saxa are also in the car. Meanwhile, Magne is talking to a police representative again. He knows for sure that there was no wind that day, but the woman objects. He said that he got to the city in half an hour and no one can do that. The young people are driving along a mountain road and Fjord puts on a song in the ancient Icelandic language, which is surprising to Gry. Suddenly, a bird breaks against the windshield of the car. Saxa and Fjord come out to look at it. The sister reminds them of the need to learn at least something about Magne and eats the bird. Puzzled by the officer's words, Magne goes to a deserted warehouse and starts jogging to see how fast he runs. He does a 100-meter dash in just 7 seconds. Meanwhile, Erich has given Isolde's jacket, which has traces of blood on it, and Vidar follows Magne and witnesses an accident in which the guy is hit by a snowplow. He joyfully announces to the family about Magne's death, who interfered with their affairs. Then Vidar confesses to the children that he killed Isolde because she found dangerous things hidden by them in the glacier. Ren reminds them of the danger they are exposed to by getting close to mortals. Meanwhile, the doctors at the hospital are perplexed. The guy who was hit by the snowplow has no injuries at all. Magne goes home, and he doesn't know that at this very moment the body of his deceased neighbor, who was a witness to the robbery of their house, was being brought to the morgue. At home, Turid thanks the gods for saving her child's life, and Magne makes another note. He is now also invulnerable. His sight and sense of smell also have improved. The next day, during the lesson, there is a skirmish when Magne blames the Utul plants for the emissions of harmful substances which caused the inhabitants of the fjord to die. Saxa resolutely defends her father. After the lesson, Magne asks the teacher to test the dried blood from his oldie's jacket. He is sure that there's someone else's blood on the clothes. At least they smell different. The woman is surprised by his sense of smell and agrees to run the test. Later, Gry asks him questions about the incident. He shows her the jacket and asks her to smell it, but the girl does not detect the difference at all. In the afternoon, a group of classmates goes to a cafe where Oscar breaks the news about Rand's behavior the previous evening, which he learned about from his friends. Saxa is outraged by the silly rumors and stirs the conversation towards Gry, who is still a virgin. This pisses Gry off, and she goes home where she finds her father in front of a can of beer. The man is upset. The insurance company refused to pay him money for his sick lungs. No one sees the connection between the disease and the emissions from the U2 factories. Meanwhile, Vidar is raging in his house. No mortal could have survived. Who is this guy? To which Rand promises to find out everything very soon, since in the evening the brothers will come to them for dinner. Magne and Lauritz go to the Utul house, unaware that they are the only guests of the evening. They are seated at a chic table and are treated to alcoholic drinks. The hosts do not skimp on the drinks. Vidar pours Magne mead, the drink of the ancient gods. Feeling intoxicated, Magne begins to behave inappropriately, and throwing an axe at the target hanging on the wall simply breaks it. And then he confides in Ren about his new strength. The woman is surprised and offers to fight with her hands. The guy promises to defeat her and holds out his hand. They begin to fight, and Magne realizes that he cannot defeat the fragile-looking woman. They fight without restraining themselves, and at some point he suddenly sees the true appearance of an ancient monster hiding behind the guise of the beauty. At this moment, the table breaks down. Jumping up from behind the wreckage, Magne sees the woman in front of him again. He goes to the bathroom and after washing his face, looks up at the mirror and suddenly sees the face of an ancient warrior staring back at him. Coming up next, a recap of the following episodes. A man discovers a loophole in the universe and travels back in time to retrieve his wife and job, while also finding out the winning lottery numbers to become wealthy. I think you and I can do this together the right way. 2016. Attorney Patrick Landry introduces his partner, Philip Grimmer, to Evelyn's sister. Love at first sight happens, although the girl warns of her upcoming departure to Prague and asks not to get attached. 6 years later, the couple wakes up in the same bed. Phil immediately rushes to his laptop while Ev answers a call from her mother, who invites them to dinner for her birthday. However, Phil, as always, doesn't listen to his wife. His mind is preoccupied with work issues. Realizing this, the woman allows her husband not to go with her and asks him to repeat it on camera. Later, Philip argues with the builders who can't seem to finish the renovation of their house. The foreman complains about the absence of the homeowner's brother Andy, whom they hired at his request, and irritated Phil promises to find another carpenter. On the way to work, Phil justifies Andy in every way, ignoring his wife's request to turn left, which leads to a traffic jam. Ev says she's taking the subway because she needs to go somewhere else. Philip, on the other hand, goes to his brother, who overslept. The crucial thing is that he hasn't consumed alcohol, which is strictly forbidden for him because he's an alcoholic. After sending his brother to work, Phil rushes to the company as it's an important day for them. He texts his wife, hoping she's already there, but she asks for a conversation which her husband once again doesn't hear. Later, they all gather at the same table because they work for the same company they own. Patrick complains about the lack of a secretary in their team, so Ev has to work much more. Still, Phil reminds them that today they will make a deal with Kiss Company, and money won't be a problem anymore. In the evening, Patrick presents his part of the presentation, while Phil works on his own. Finally, after finishing everything, the man goes home, only to find the bedroom painted blue and his wife asleep. In the morning, Ev wakes him up with a question about the bedroom color. However, her husband refuses to discuss this trivial matter and rushes to meet with representatives of the Kiss Company, which specializes in building mines for valuable minerals. The lawyers are convinced that they are the best to mediate with the locals who oppose the project. Afterward, Phil rushes home with champagne to celebrate their success with his wife, but Ev meets him with her things packed, as she intends to leave him. She reminds him of numerous instances when he ignored her interests and departs. Phil roams around the house, not knowing what to do, but then remembers the invitation from his mother-in-law and goes to Evelyn's parents' home. However, the woman refuses to talk to him, and to prevent a scandal, Patrick takes his friend to a bar. He confesses that he knew about his sister's intentions but kept quiet because of a contract. Disheartened, Phil heads to the restroom, where he stumbles upon an ad inviting him to use Plan B and correct his mistakes. All evening he tries to find his wife, but she is nowhere to be found, and she doesn't answer his calls. The man dials the agency's number and, not entirely sure what he's doing, names the date of the day he'd like to return to. Specifically, yesterday morning. In the morning, Phil wakes up to find Andy working in his living room. Due to the events of the previous day, his head isn't functioning well, and he is surprised to read a message from Plan B. Then, there's a knock on the door, and two identical guys appear on the doorstep, grabbing Phil and dragging him into a van parked outside. After this, he wakes up 2 days earlier. Bewildered, Phil, without allowing his wife to finish, agrees to go to her mother's birthday party, which astonishes Evelyn. He also requests the foreman to find a replacement for his brother. On the way, stuck in traffic again, he follows his wife and discovers her at a clinic, where a surprised Ev mentions a delay. Phil doesn't understand why she didn't tell him earlier, but she suggests discussing it later. He waits for her in the car, where his wife admits she considered their relationship over. Her husband pleads for another chance and asks her to remind him what color she wanted for the bedroom. He then calls the foreman, who has already painted the walls blue, orders him to stop, and later fires Andy. At work, Phil takes on all of Ev's extra work, which leaves him with no time to complete his part of the presentation. While his wife goes to meet a friend, he rushes home and paints the walls in her favorite color. Catching him in the act, Evelyn is surprised, but counts it as an effort. Furthermore, he apologizes for her having to do something she doesn't love, despite always dreaming of being a musician. He suggests she resume playing the cello. The woman is completely taken aback. In the morning, Phil confesses that he hasn't finished his part of the presentation. Patrick tries to fix the situation, but Kiss refuses to sign a contract with the lawyers. Later, the family goes to a formal dinner, where Phil raises a toast to the family. Patrick admits that he had a relationship with one of the Kiss executives for the sake of the contract, even though he has a family, and they still have a chance. On the way home, Ev thanks her husband for his efforts to save their family, and the couple loves each other. In the morning, the wife starts searching the internet for a cello and a good tutor, when cries come from downstairs. The angry Andy has come to confront his brother who fired him, which means he won't be able to pay child support or see his daughter. At this point, Patrick calls and reminds him that everyone is already waiting for him. Andy leaves, and Ev expresses her grievances since her husband had promised to pay for both the repairs and her desires. The preoccupied Phil promises to sort everything out. 3 years ago, Phil and Ev spend a vacation in the Caribbean. They are completely happy, and the woman suggests getting married right there. Phil even tries to give her a ring, but he gets scared of something and backs out of his intention. In 2022, Phil shows Ev the cello he has repurchased for her, which she had once sold, and promises that everything will be very good for them. Afterward, he checks on his brother, whom he got a job, and they are very pleased with his performance. Andy asks him to pass a gift to his daughter, because his wife spotted him drunken and hasn't allowed them to meet. Andy's wife doesn't believe in her ex-husband's potential for change, but Phil persuades her otherwise and gives the gift to his niece. Later, he brilliantly presents and Kiss signs a contract with them, provided that they find a good lawyer who will exclusively represent them. In the evening, Patrick informs Phil that he has made arrangements with a highly reputed lawyer and asks him to attend a meeting. It turns out to be Miranda Delano, which Phil receives with visible tension. The reason is that he outplayed her in court, and the woman hasn't forgotten that. Furthermore, it's evident that Miranda has a liking for Phil, who agrees to have her join their firm. In the morning, the man meets the new secretary hired by Patrick and finds him with the representative from Kiss, who approves of Miranda's invitation. She has come to provide them with the addresses of 2 property owners who refuse to sell and thus obstruct the scheduled construction. On the way, Phil tries to convince Patrick to reconsider Miranda, but he can't understand the reasons for this. The couple manages to persuade one of the stubborn property owners, while Evelyn begins taking her first lessons, which makes it difficult for her to fulfill her duties at the firm. Meanwhile, the second property owner sends lawyers and refuses to sell. In the evening, Ev comes home later than planned because she met with a friend and again refuses to discuss the appearance of a child. Meanwhile, Patrick rents a good apartment for the secretary within walking distance of the office, persuading the young woman that she is indispensable. Later, the lawyers meet with representatives of KISS, who point out a mistake in the documents made by Ev. Patrick informs them that Miranda is on her way to their office at the moment. Phil rushes there but doesn't manage to prevent the meeting of the two women. Later, Phil points out Ev's mistake, which is why they had to seek a competent lawyer, since she won't be able to work soon. The woman refuses to talk, and Phil calls Plan B to prevent the hiring of Miranda, but it turns out his credit card is empty. He buys flowers and goes to his wife, who is upset that Miranda has re-entered their lives. It turns out that Ev received a message from Phil to Miranda by mistake, where he confessed his desire to be with her. Although her husband argued that there was nothing between them, she can't stand to hear the rival's name. She gave up her career to be with him, and Phil doesn't appreciate it, bringing Miranda into their firm. But the husband reminds her that she chose him over her career, and now he is the one fighting for their relationship. In the morning, he apologizes to his wife and shows her the ring, purchased even before their trip to the Caribbean. He talks about the cancellation of the offer to Miranda, and then goes to the lawyer to inform her that she won't be able to work at their firm. His next destination is the home of the second property owner, where he discovers that their new secretary is the daughter of the stubborn man. After listening to her, he begins to lean towards the decision to sell the house. After that, Phil informs Patrick that he and Ev are going on vacation and the offer to Miranda is cancelled. He tells Evelyn the same thing, confessing that he was flattered by the attention of a famous lawyer. He asks for the child to still be a part of their plans, and Ev agrees, packing for the trip. They arrive at the same place where once upon a time, Philip was going to propose. Upon reaching the shore, he presents Ev with the ring. However, she recalls the feelings she experienced upon learning about Miranda and admits that she cheated on him. Phil throws the ring away and leaves. Returning home, Phil learns that the public is in an uproar over Kiss's intention to open the mine and accuses the lawyers of deception. Evelyn tries to talk to Phil, and he finally agrees to listen to her in exchange for the name of her lover. Ev reminds him of a client who was upset about his divorce and hit a woman on the way home. So, his lawyer, Terrence, showed interest in her. They had a brief fling, but it didn't last long. She asks her husband for forgiveness, but Phil is unforgiving, even though he was busy with Miranda at the time. The man remembers how the lawyer gave him her address, but he didn't go to her back then. Ev continues to remember how she asked for his help because she felt a lump in her chest and was very afraid of cancer. Her husband just brushed off her fears at the time, but Phil suddenly asks about the timing of her affair and concludes that the child inside her is not his, as they always used protection. At this time, Patrick ends his relationship with one of the KISS leaders he got involved with for the contract. Phil has to search for his seemingly drunk brother and calm down their selfish mother, who reminds him of the day when Andy, his brother, stormed into her house, causing trouble. They accuse each other of mutual inattentiveness, and Phil ends up taking the blame again. Later, he conducts an interview with a candidate for the lawyer role, who proposes entirely unacceptable terms. After this, Phil fires Ev because it was her mistake that got them into this situation. A quarrel ensues, and the man admits that he shouldn't have bought the house with her. Patrick learns about this and reminds him that half the firm is his. But Phil doesn't want to hear anything and calls Plan B to prevent the purchase of the house. Soon, Patrick calls him, revealing that he had been keeping his family a secret from his lover, who saw them with the children today. This could cause problems with KISS. On TV, reports about protests against the mine construction are broadcast, which Ev interrupts, reminding Phil of the day they didn't use protection. So, the child is definitely his. And right at that moment, the twins from Plan B ring the doorbell. Phil finds himself back on the day when they were inspecting the house, and he decided not to buy it. Later, Ev asks him to help examine her breast because she thinks there is a lump. He advises his wife to see a doctor and heads to court, where his opponent is Miranda. Phil counters all her objections and proposes to meet and discuss the terms. During the conversation, he receives a call from Andy, and Phil remembers that today, an unpleasant scene will take place at his brother's wife's house. He rushes there and prevents the scandal. He returns home late, and Evelyn, who has woken up, comforts him, sympathizing with his problems with his brother. In the morning, she initiates a conversation about the house, but Phil avoids answering because he constantly envisions Ev's infidelity. The next day, he tells his brother that Ev might be unfaithful to him, but Andy doesn't understand this perspective. Why worry about something that hasn't happened? Later, he wins the court case, and Miranda invites him to dinner, after which the two of them end up at her place. But suddenly, Phil sees Evelyn's face before him and realizes that he cannot betray the woman he loves. He goes back home, confesses his love to Ev, and in the morning, he suggests that they get back to making music, as that's what she had always wanted. He also agrees to buy the house they both liked. He easily wins all the cases that follow, amazes his wife with his foresight, and decides to quit working for Kiss. Andy returns to the family, and Phil becomes the lawyer for the man involved in the past accident with a woman. He comforts his client and offers to drive him home, as the man is deeply upset and has been drinking. They pause at the spot where the tragedy happened, and the woman calmly crosses the road. After dropping off his client at home, Phil drives to Terrence's law firm just to see him. In the evening, he buys flowers and arrives on time to conceive a child. The next day, Patrick informs that he secured a contract to represent the residents against Kiss, and Ev heads for an audition. Over time, the couple's relatives visit their new home and learn about Ev's pregnancy. They all raise a toast for the cellist's success, but Phil still can't shake off the visions of her being unfaithful to him. Evelyn starts rehearsals with the chamber orchestra, and her conductor pays close attention to her. Meanwhile, lawyers discover that Kiss is buying land around the designated mining areas. But why? Patrick learns about Kiss Company's data and starts monitoring it. One day, he follows a woman and stumbles upon a gathering of people who want to climb Mount Kilimanjaro to raise money for cancer research, where he meets the woman. As for Phil, he goes to meet Ev after her rehearsal and observes her warm relationship with the conductor, Alejandro, which once again triggers jealousy in him. Moreover, she refuses to leave because she needs to rehearse a lot. Patrick, on the other hand, continues to get to know the corporation's expert in chemistry, who reveals information about the mineral extracted by Kiss. It's not the mineral itself that's dangerous, but what surrounds it, which is why the business people are buying up the neighboring lands. This means that the people living nearby will undoubtedly suffer if mineral mining begins. At the same time, Ev spends more time with the orchestra, which, of course, bothers Phil. Nevertheless, he tries to control his jealousy. One day, he attends an Alcoholics Anonymous meeting to support Andy and hears him speak about his brother, who is a role model for him. Andy introduces his brother to the organizer of the meetings, and Phil brings up the issue of infidelity that never happened. Andy acknowledges that there is a problem. As for Phil, a new obsession develops. Now he envisions Ev with Alejandro. Patrick continues his relationship with the expert and gets to know her seriously ill partner, earning the woman's complete trust. Meanwhile, people from the surrounding area come to Phil, scared and refusing to sue Kiss, which makes him late for Evelyn's performance. This causes her anger and another argument. But the couple makes amends, and their relationship is restored until the moment when Ev has to leave for a tour. Phil notices that she doesn't look well, but she attributes it to tiredness. Later, Patrick announces that the expert revealed that her safety report was a fake, which means they have the corporation in their hands. He intends to threaten Kiss and demand a substantial sum from them. Phil reminds him that without the girl's testimony, the recording won't be considered evidence. With no place to go after work, and his wife not answering his calls, Phil remembers the meeting place and decides to go there to talk to the organizer. The man listens to his confessions about not trusting his wife and laments that, unfortunately, one cannot turn back time. He advises Phil to either accept the woman or let her go and move on. In the morning, he witnesses a commotion in Patrick's office. The expert has no intention of confirming her statements, which means the information gathered by the lawyer holds no weight. Then Patrick suggests intimidating Kiss, to which Phil recommends hiring their own expert and conducting analyses. Patrick takes it upon himself to go to the corporation and tells them that he knows everything and demands hush money. Meanwhile, Phil receives a call from Quebec in the middle of the night, informing him that Ev is in the hospital due to premature labor. He rushes there and learns that the situation was triggered by an infection. The woman is out of danger, but their baby girl is very weak and gets sent to a specialized clinic. At the same time, Patrick discovers a noose hanging on a swing set in his yard. Evelyn struggles with the aftermath, while Phil organizes her transfer to the same clinic where their daughter is. Patrick nearly hits a car in the parking lot. Meanwhile, the doctor informs Ev that her daughter is very weak and is unlikely to survive. The cause of this was a urinary tract infection in the mother, which triggered a kidney disease in the baby. Phil tries to ascertain the exact timing of when the illness started, but the doctor doesn't understand and refuses to answer. Later, all the relatives come to support Ev, and Patrick asks Phil to be closer to his sister. After returning home, Patrick finds a box with pictures of his family. This night, Ev confesses that she has felt unwell for a long time, but skipped the doctor's appointment due to her tour schedule. Phil asks the doctor for a prognosis, and she admits that, in all likelihood, Ev could have prevented what happened by coming in for an examination. Phil calls Plan B. 5 years ago, the couple discusses the possibility of having children, but Evelyn wants to ensure they have everything they need. Phil promises that when their children arrive, they will grow up in a big house with everything they need. In the present, Phil places an order and is informed that the agents will arrive tomorrow. In the meantime, he goes to the boxing gym, takes out a tiny girl, and promises that he will definitely save her. He makes the same promise to his wife, who is on the verge of despair. Meanwhile, Patrick receives instructions to go to a motel and check in under a false name. He complies, calls Phil, and tells him that he went to kiss, and now he's being threatened. He asks for help, but Phil doesn't want to assist someone who acted against his advice. The next day, Phil waits for the Plan B agents, but they are nowhere to be found. Evelyn asks him to come to her, but he can't leave the house. He waits and starts cutting some information on his arm. They arrive late in the evening, and Phil finds himself at the moment when his wife was getting ready for her tour. He immediately tells Ev that she can't go because she has a fever, but she refuses to listen. Phil refers to the vision and then says that he has already experienced this. He tries to stop her, but Evelyn falls down the stairs just when her friend enters the house. Thankfully, there are no injuries to Evelyn, but the mere fact that her husband allegedly pushed her causes a real shock. The women literally rush to the orchestra's van, not giving Phil a chance to explain. Then he gets into his car and rushes after them, listening to Patrick's message about the false kiss report. He asks his partner not to threaten the corporation and promises to handle everything, but realizing that he can't stop Evelyn, he turns onto another road, calls his mother, and asks her to inform Ev that he had an accident and was taken to a clinical hospital. The woman calls Ev, and she, along with her friend, rushes to the hospital where her doctor, whom Phil tracked down, is already waiting for her. She insists on a checkup while Phil buys a lottery ticket. Evelyn meets her husband with suspicion because he looks quite well for someone who was in an accident, but Patrick becomes the center of his attention, eager to find out how he learned about the fake reports. However, Phil asks to postpone all the questions because Evelyn is in danger. Then the doctor informs them that she has detected an infection, and this is a real miracle. Had they come later, things could have gone very badly. The expectant mother must adhere to bed rest. Phil has to come up with an explanation for noticing discharge on her underwear, thereby suspecting an illness and then having a dream in which their daughter was born prematurely and died because Ev didn't undergo an examination. Ev doesn't believe him, but Phil finds excuses for all her questions. The most important thing is that they are both fine. At this moment, the lottery results are shown on TV, and Phil rolls up his sleeve, concealing the numbers cut into his skin. Later, he wins a huge jackpot, but keeps it a secret from everyone. In this storyline, he goes to kiss himself, and, threatening to carry out an independent investigation, demands that they abandon the construction of the mine in the populated area. Later, Evelyn expresses her frustration at having to stay in bed for months, but Phil reminds her of her words about not being able to cope if something happens to the baby. Evelyn is surprised. She didn't say such things. Meanwhile, the lawyer persuades people not to give in to kiss and to preserve the environment for their children and grandchildren, although Patrick is in favor of taking the corporation's money and ending the resistance because he needs the money to pay off his mortgage. But Phil remains resolute and reminds them about conscience. 2 days later, he goes to pick up Evelyn, not realizing that he is being followed. He picks up his wife, who doesn't understand what has happened to her partner, who tries to control her every move. Evelyn is surprised to see a new car, and Phil almost hits Patrick's car in the parking lot. A letter with photos of his family is found at the door. He calls a specialist to install security systems in the house, which surprises Evelyn. He has to confess that Kiss is threatening him. He tells Patrick the same thing. He then offers him money to leave the firm. The partner is utterly puzzled, and Phil gives an interview where he reveals everything about the deal with the corporation and the fake reports. A commotion ensues, and now it's pointless and even dangerous to threaten Phil. Evelyn misses him more and more, so Phil brings a stack of videotapes and books to the house and hires a housekeeper and a nurse for her. She doesn't understand where the money came from, and in the meantime, Phil buys a new house and buys out Patrick's share for a very good price. One day, he catches Evelyn at home with Alejandro and her friend, with whom she's rehearsing, and again, he experiences jealousy. Unable to stand it, he takes Evelyn to the new house and admits that he won $25 million. He shows her the house, especially proud of the children's room when Evelyn's water breaks. He takes her to the hospital, where Evelyn gives birth to a healthy girl. 7 years ago, Evelyn wakes up with a hangover in bed with a guy who hopes for a continuation of their relationship. But Evelyn has no intention of starting a relationship, and today she needs to be at a party celebrating the opening of her brother's law firm, where she meets Phil and eventually enters into a relationship. In the present, Phil joyfully takes care of the child and establishes a fund to help sick children to prevent sorrow and pain. However, his transformation into a politician leads to Evelyn's feeling of misunderstanding and even disapproval. Patrick also hopes for his return to the firm, although he acquired it entirely. And one day, Evelyn confesses that he is suffocating her with his care. He always knows what to do and makes her follow his advice. Then Phil tells her about the Plan B agency, which makes her laugh. Naturally, she doesn't believe his words and confesses that she, too, would like to move back in time, never abandon music, not live in the house, not have a child, and not be with him in the first place. Phil is shocked by her admission and suggests they go back to the past, right now. He dials a number, but Evelyn thinks he's crazy and leaves. At home, the woman packs her things and prepares her daughter, despite all her husband's promises to change. He is ready to give her everything, as long as she doesn't leave, but it's all in vain, and Evelyn goes to her parents' house. For the first time, Phil can't decide which period in time he needs to go to in order to fix this. He spends whole days at home, staring at the ceiling when Andy comes and tries to help his brother in any way possible. This ends in a drinking binge and the realization that no amount of money and effort can change the present. He starts to get heavily involved in the foundation's work, allocating money for the construction of a children's hospital, when Patrick suddenly shows up with Evelyn because Phil demanded full custody of their daughter. He warns that no one will be able to prove that Evelyn is a bad mother, but a friend of his wife saw him push her down the stairs. Phil offers Patrick $200,000, but for the first time in his life, Patrick is in no need of money, unable to comprehend how his friend reached this point. Evelyn shows up at rehearsals and tells Alejandro that her relationship with Phil is over. However, the woman does not prevent Phil from communicating with their daughter after he has given up full custody. The man goes on outings with the little girl and takes her on weekends. Gradually, his relationship with Evelyn and Patrick improves, although Phil does not rush to sign a divorce agreement. One day, the man goes to a pool where children's classes are taking place and he participates in them, while Evelyn watches from the sidelines, understanding that Phil loves their daughter very much. The woman dedicates herself entirely to her creativity and socializing with friends, even though she disagrees that these years were wasted. However, Charlotte falls ill somehow, and the couple goes to the hospital, where a doctor, seeing how they care for the girl, calls them an excellent team. On the way back, Phil confesses his love to his wife, but she doesn't want to hear it. They manage to be parents but not a couple. After these words, Phil freezes at the wheel, and in the next moment, a collision occurs. His consciousness flickers on and off as he sees doctors, then Patrick, then doctors again, and Andy. Last of all, Evelyn comes in, wishing him to die as soon as possible. But soon Phil regains consciousness and asks Andy to take him home. Andy complies with his request, even though his brother has sustained quite severe injuries. At home, he finds the Plan B number and places an order. Andy can't understand what's happening, but his brother simply asks him to wait. In the morning, the doorbell rings, and the twins appear at the doorstep of Evelyn. They drag her into the van, and the woman wakes up with a hangover, in bed with a guy who hopes for a continuation of their relationship. Evelyn can't understand how this was possible, and realizing she is in the past, she screams in horror. She bursts into her brother's party and throws a fit, accusing Phil of killing her daughter. Onlookers believe she has gone insane, and Phil even claims he is seeing her for the first time. Her friend believes she might have hit her head, but reminds her that it is time to fly to Prague, as she wanted. The woman packs up and starts a new life. 7 years later, she flies to Canada with Alejandro, whom she intends to marry and introduce to her parents. And at the same time, Phil meets his pregnant wife, Miranda, who had been meeting her ex-husband for business matters, which doesn't sit well with her current spouse. However, Miranda reminds him that she's here with him and has no intention of going anywhere. Besides, they're expecting a child. Phil apologizes because he's been trying hard not to control her every move. They go to a concert where Patrick and his family are also present, and he introduces Evelyn to his friend's family. Later, when they're alone, she confesses that she was very angry with him, but now she's grateful for what he did. She's happy in doing what she loves. It's at this point that Phil apologizes for both himself and Charlotte, indicating that everything that happened was not what it seemed. Many people dream of going back in time and changing something that ruined their lives, but does it always lead to a better outcome?